Hi, it's Chanan Hanspal here. A few weeks ago, I met up with a good friend of mine, Yaan-Zek, who is a great composer and musician. I've known Phi for a very long time. We grew up in the same village in South Wales and went to the same school. This video was shot 2 weeks ago, and we just let the camera roll and just chat about music in general, growing up and experimenting with early recording technology, working with session musicians. Phi talks about his experience with Mike Keneally, Bryan Beller, Marco Minnemann. I talk about mine, working with session musicians in London in the early 90s, session musicians who were playing with people like Paul McCartney, Chaka Khan, Bjork. A day after filming this, both Phi and I drove to Kidderminster to visit Andy Edwards, who had invited us over to, film this recording session. And it was a great day. And in fact, I can't remember the last time I played live with Phi. And it was actually the first time I had ever played with Andy, who was just a fantastic drummer, such a great musician. And that was a really fun day. That was recorded, and I think it's been posted on Andy's channel. It's called The Cosmic Extravaganza, something like that. And that sort of is a good indication of the type of fun that we had on the day recording those sessions. But in the meantime, here is part of our interview now. I just wanted to say that this video you're about to see is only part of the filming that took place that day. There's a lot of other stuff that's going to come out later on. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy this.
Oh, get a blaster type.
Yeah, that's how I started recording.
So that's how you capture your ideas?
Yeah, but it was just obviously, there was no tracking, double dubbing. It was just overdubbing rather. It was just one
take.
One take, yeah.
So how would you just record each idea and then in the future combine them somehow?
It was. I mean, I didn't get into overdub until much later on when I had the means to do it. I guess the first time I had the opportunity to do it was when I was studying at the conservatorium in Australia, and we had the equipment to do it. And we had a little technology studio, and we were using C-Lab. I don't know if you remember C-Lab. It was one of the first kind of music sequencing software. It was very basic, very crude, comparatively speaking. And that was when I realized that, I could start overdubbing musical ideas. And that was the first time I actually started to hear. I had done overdubbing before on Tascam 4-track machines and that, but I don't think I ever owned one. I was always using someone else's. Borrowing it. And yourself?
I bought, I think just in my late teens, a Fostex X26 4-track. I was borrowing some from some friends as well. I remember there's another guitarist who I borrowed. He had a Tascam, and so I thought, I just something about. I was naive. I thought now I can record an album sort of thing. I got a 4-track, and I just felt like I wanted to record music. There's something about exploring that frontier that was just so appealing to me. So I got that, and then realised its limitations, and realised that a little AKG dynamic mic on my acoustic guitar doesn't make it sound like it's an amazing production. And just realised, how come it doesn't sound like the record? I've got an acoustic guitar, I've got the microphone. I mean, my 4-track should sound like this pristine sound. And then I'm miking up my amp, and how come it sounds so weedy and nasally? And you sort of.
You start to learn about production.
Yeah, you start realizing there's a huge knowledge gap here, and but in my naivety, I've got a 4-track, I've got some mics, got a little Zoom effects unit I can get all these funny sounds from, and I'm away, and a Yamaha drum machine. I can go for it. And I thought, this is I could record an album. But the funny thing is, this because. During that year, I got the 4-track. I went to Vienna to study music at the American Institute of Music. So I took my 4-track with me. And I did actually start an album project with Lale and a French guitarist called Régis Munerel. And we did this recording, which is my first recording actually, called The Cosmic Monstrosities, which was a sort of a shred guitar. It's just jamming over some, modal funky fusion backings, and then shredding and getting all the best guitarists I knew to contribute a solo, as well as myself. So it was kind of trying to do there's something came out called the Mark Varney project, which had.
I remember that.
Yeah, so I was trying to do a budget version of that with a 4-track. and it came across okay. I mean, I did sort of bounce it down later onto an 8-track and do some clever editing to kind of stereoize the mono tracks I used. But yeah, that was my first recording. That came out, well, initially it came out on a cassette in '94, and then eventually I bounced it onto 8-track, and then...
I think with the early experimentations with 4-track recording, I don't know if you felt the same about this, was, of course, there were the production considerations to be aware of, I suppose, your sort of recollection of, oh, well, you know, it doesn't sound like the record. For me at that point, I'm not sure if it was the same for you, I didn't even consider that. I was just so excited about the fact that I could just overdub my guitars. Wow. That in itself was enough of a novelty for me just to sort of be, oh, wow, you know. And then, of course, the production values and the understanding how to mix and all the rest of that stuff came later on. But I think in the first instance, I was just so excited to be able to, you know, overdub ideas and harmonize guitar lines and things like that. I didn't really think about
there's an innocence in that, isn't there?
Yeah, I guess.
I think for me, I think part of me was that. I had the part of me was just like, let's experiment. So I had my experimental side, and then I had my inner critique. How come this doesn't sound like Passion and Warfare? You know, the one that sets the impossible standards.
Even struggling to get that kind of sound now, 30 odd years later. It's such a great sound.
But, you know, that's, you know, what I did. I got a 4-track, got some microphones. Yeah. How come it doesn't sound like Passion and Warfare into production? You know, in my naivety. But I did have the others. I mean, if it was just that, I would have just been disillusioned and pulled my hair out and, you know, jumped out a window in frustration or something. But there was a side that did enjoy the pure experimentation. I would do sort of like just 4-part harmony experimentations, you know, just harmonize things, and then I remember doing 4-part harmony, starting with Bach, and then I thought, like, what if I do a rogue track of random notes in the harmony? And I started getting these strange, unexpected harmonies coming out, and then just played like that, thinking, and then flipping it backwards. Good, you can do the backwards stuff as well by turning it turning it back the other way around, the tape the other way around. So there was a lot of experimentation, and a lot of the stuff that I experimented came out on other recordings in the 90s. The holotropic guitar had some of those experimentations which were developed. Even stuff from Anomalies had stuff like that. But there was that side of me that was always trying to, I want to record an album. I want to record an album given my means. So, you know, I think in 95 I bought an 8-track, Yamaha 8-track, and that was like, now I can record an album. I've got 8 tracks. Yay! There's a little cassette 8-track as well, which was really neat.
What was it? Fostex?
It was a Yamaha. MT8X, and that really opened the world because the 8-track just got doubled now. And then I also bought the other thing I bought a sampling keyboard, Ensoniq sampling keyboard, which opened me up to sampling and all these world of sounds which you could load in on floppy disk into the keyboard. It had a sequencer.
I gave you a sound, but was it the ProSonic I gave, the E-ProSonic?
You gave me the Proteus.
The Proteus, was it?
EMU Proteus.
EMU, that's right, yeah.
Proteus.
Did you ever make any use of that? Or?
I did a bit. I did, but then I sold it.
Well, glad you went
I had to downsize. I did play with it a bit. I think at the time it was just because I think the reason you got rid of it is that everything was starting to transfer to computer. Wasn't it?
It was all changing. Yeah.
And then you had all these modules, and they were just kind of like, well, you can just get a sound bank that has all the sounds and have it on a hard drive.
Exactly. It was the same thing with the samplers, wasn't it? You know, the kind of hardware.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember I nearly bought one of those EMU samplers. Went to Turnkey in London. I nearly bought one, and it was about £1,200. You know,
that was one of the cheaper ones. Because it went up to about $3,000 or so.
I know, and I really wanted one, and I was that much away from buying it, and I for some reason didn't buy it. And then a few months later, I realized that a lot of the sampling I could do by other means, which were more cost effective. You know, I'm glad I didn't buy it in the end. I think the only reason I was buying it was because the studio I was working in at the time, I had 2 of them, and I was getting such so much mileage out of them for my own music that I was recording at the time. And then when I moved the studio to my home, I thought, oh, well, I need to get that as part of my arsenal. But I didn't do it in the end, and I didn't need to do it. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I sort of relinquished ownership of the EMU Proteus. It was silly to have all this stuff when it can be done in software.
Yeah. Did your early gear and did that create the sound of your early recordings? Was that sort of like, because I mean, for me, I was thinking like, going back to '95 when I had this investment of, right, I'm going to buy an 8-track. I'm going to buy a sample. I bought a Roland drum machine. So I was thinking, and that really created the sound of my first 3 albums, which, because there's Anomalies and Worlds Beyond Cause, and they were kind of recorded at the same time. And I started, recording for an album. And then I also got this guitar effects unit, and Boss guitar racker unit, which had all the sounds I wanted in it. So I thought, I got all the elements now. And when I listened back to those recordings and stuff that became Holotropic Guitar, those 3 albums are like kind of I think of as my 90s albums. They're sort of, the sonic sound of them is informed by the gear, that you has the signature, and the guitar sound, which came from this Boss effects, rack effects unit. And that gives the sound. When I listen to those albums, it's that signature sound of them, which defines that era and defines that sound and defines the quality of that, and which makes it unique because the gear's been sold. I'm a different person, different guitarist, different way of playing, or I've developed my way of playing. So it has a sort of captures a special moment. I mean, and the other thing is I've also since remixed them and polished them up, bouncing them down to computer. So I haven't done that with Worlds Beyond Cause yet, but I'm planning to, because I've done that with Anomalies and Holotropic Guitar. They've been given the sort of the remix treatment and polished up a bit. But it still has a sound. It's interesting because you can sort of follow different eras of your compositional style, and that is sort of informed by the limitations of what production you had available. I only had 8 tracks, so I had to make the best use of that. I didn't have the sort of, I didn't have at the time those first 3 albums. I mean, I later got drums overdubbed onto them, but there was a drum machine for originally on most of the tracks.
And then, so you replaced the drums?
I replaced the drum machines, not every track, because some of the other thing I thought, well, let's use electronic sounds for what they do best. So I thought I'd start using some techno dance sort of beats as well, and drum and bass beats as influenced by that, because rather than try and mimic a real drummer, I thought that, well, let's use the electronic sounds for what they do best. And then afterwards, the ones which where I was mimicking a drummer, I'm like, for Anomalies, I got Andy Edwards into I think 10 years later, I think, because that's came out in '97, and then the anniversary release, 10-year anniversary, came out in 2007. So in 2006, I got Andy Edwards to replace all those drum sounds, which we're trying to replicate a real drummer. I thought, well, let's have a real drummer on that, and then that just lifted it up to a different level. But some of them were, like on Worlds Beyond Cause, I'm using sort of weird techno, electronica, Aphex Twin, sort of housey dance stuff, but twisting them in such weird ways. I think I was just sort of thinking, okay, if I'm going to go down this avenue, how can I make it more psychedelic and weird and bizarre, and push those sounds as far as they can go. And even it goes a bit industrial. I was distorting the drums. I was sort of trying to see what would happen if I distort them, combining different sounds from the sampler and the drum machine, speeding up the drums on the drum machine. I was changing the pitch of the drums as I was sort of bouncing them down, and you're bouncing things down to tape as well. So you rather than just press play, I thought, well, let's mess with stuff as it goes onto the tape as well. So playing with the EQ, playing with filters, playing with the pitch, so everything was very hands-on and organic, and let's mess with it as it's going down to tape. So that was fun, and that sort of informed the sound that I got in those albums, and they do. And I would say, those first 3 albums have are an era in themselves, because after that, I think like 2003 is when I got in touch with Marco Minnemann. Then I started involving other musicians into it. I mean, there was some, because Lale would play solos on stuff, so there were other musicians involved, and I'd have little guest appearances, but having an actual band as the basis of the music, that started with Solar Flare, which came out in 2005, and that sort of changed the direction of the music. But prior to that was a sort of DIY home ethic of 8-track recorder, sampling.
So you've done everything
keyboard.
yourself pretty
Yeah,
much.
home recording, which was, I think that was the revolution of the technology, just being able to sort of have your own 8-track recorder, which if you think, back in the 60s, that would have been luxury, to have a 8-track recorder. So yeah, that just opened it all up. But you took a different path to that. You didn't have so much that home recording style,
no,
did you?
You were talking about the recordings in the early days. I mean, apart from messing around with overdubbing on like those kind of 4-track tape machines, cassettes. I didn't have the reel-to-reel ones. But I guess after that, well, what happened was a friend of mine, he bought a studio, and he had it installed in his house. He had a purpose-built room, and he got a 24-track Mackie desk. He had Tascam DA88s, and he bought a whole bunch of stuff. At the time, about 95, I think it was 1995, he must have spent about 30-odd grand on the whole thing.
Yeah.
And he didn't really use it much, and he just gave me the keys to the house, and that's where I did a lot of recording between 1995, I would say, to 1998.
Is that Miles?
That's Charlie. Charlie Creed Miles, who's an actor and a musician, and he had done this big film, and he got lots of money for it, and that's what he did with some of the money. It was just, I think it was around the time, maybe Nil by Mouth.
Yeah.
And we'd done that film with Gary Oldman, and he just invested in the studio. But then after he started to get quite busy, and he was off to Los Angeles hanging out with Gary Oldman, and he did that film Fifth Element with Bruce Willis. So he was really busy, and I think he wanted somebody just to keep an eye on the house.
Right.
So he just gave me the keys, and I just had full access to this 24-track studio.
Magical.
It was a bit of a curse as well, because I didn't know how to use it.
Okay.
So I had to learn how to, I had to work my way around it. I would get in people who knew, and I would learn, ask them questions, and then just make notes. I mean, in the early days, a lot of the drums we recorded. Charlie played the drums on a lot of the tracks, and he had these kind of Neumann mics, really expensive microphones, and we were so naive and inexperienced in terms of recording. We were just all right, but this is a great mic. Yeah. Doesn't matter where you place it or what you do with it. Let's just get all of the mics in. Let's get 7 or 8 mics on the drum kit. And the drum kit was in a room about half this size. It was a very small room.
Right.
We had 2 Neumanns on like overhead Neumanns, right? And then we had one on the snare, one underneath the snare, one across the snare, and we had one on each tom. We just went over the top with the.
So how many? Did you mix them down to a stereo pair on the desk? Or
yeah,
did you
on the desk. But we had them, obviously, before mixing them down to a stereo pair, you got like 7 or 8 tracks, so you need to try. The problem was, it was an isolation problem, because the snare was picking up more of the hi-hat than the mic on the hi-hat was picking up, you know? And it was just a mess. It was just a mess. So over the years, I've released some of these tracks on my albums, but I've had to really work hard to try and make them sound, at a good level, because the mixing requires so many concessions, because there were too many microphones. The drum kit was out of tune some of the time, and it was just like we had all this specialized equipment, but no idea. Just get all the mics out. We got all these brand new mics. Let's mic the whole kit up and see what happens. It was bloody awful. In some cases, I had to take. There's some track like the album of Ephemeral Morph. There's a piece on there called "Hit by a Chicken Salad." And that was the drum track. Charlie recorded the drum track, but there were so many problems on that recording, like the ones I've just explained. I had to transfer the audio, convert the audio to MIDI,
right,
and then go through the MIDI and clean it all up. Then assign the MIDI to a drum program to BFD.
Right.
So the MIDI would trigger the drums in a really in the air studios where they were recording really nice sounding drum kit, because I didn't want to lose the feel.
Yes.
Of it, you know, because he did such a great take. So in the end, I just put new drum kit on the whole thing. Yeah. So it's him playing, but it's not the sound of his kit.
Yeah. Okay.
And I did a little bit of that to fix those problems, you know.
Yeah.
But so yeah, it was access to a full studio, and a lot of recordings were made there.
So there's a lot of those of your output comes from those years, isn't it?
There is a lot of output from those years that have appeared on subsequent recordings. You know, I mean, a lot of during the 90s, I just didn't stop composing.
Yeah.
That's all I did. It was just continuously composing. So there's a lot of music from those times, and even now there's still music that I haven't completed or recorded and mixed properly, but it's coming out slowly. You know, but yeah, there's still a lot of music, and then there's music thereafter that needs to be organized and prepared for release, you know.
Yeah.
Did you, I mean, you had a similar situation where you had recorded things and later on put them on albums?
I think, again, that period of the home recordings of the 90s, it yielded a lot of material. And there's still even unreleased material. I could fill up another album of material from the 90s. Some of it will probably need a bit of finishing off as well. It's not all complete. But there are some. Yeah, there's a lot of, again, being quite a prolific composer. There's a lot of material there.
Yeah.
And stuff that I'd recorded and maybe left aside because I didn't have the production skills to kind of finish it the way I wanted to. But now, obviously, with computers, you can do. But I think I just sort of started moving on by the 2000s, especially when I sort of got in touch with Marco, and that opened doors to other worlds and other musicians, and we started working together.
You started working with Mike Keneally as well.
Yeah, that's when Marco moved from Germany to San Diego. So, and that opened up the door to all the people living in that in the Mike Keneally scene, Bryan Beller and all that crowd. Because I was just a huge Mike Keneally fan. I was absolutely, during those in the 90s, I just devoured those Mike Keneally albums of Sluggo, Ball That Dust Speck, Hat. They were just like on permanent rotation, and so I was just thinking, oh, I'd love that sound of his band on my albums. So when, I can remember with Dog coming out, I think that came out 2004 or something like that, and I remember thinking, loved Bryan Beller's playing on that album and his tone, and I was thinking, God, I started writing vocal material. I wanted, I envisioned that sound that was on that Mike Keneally album on my next album. So I was writing songs in that vein, very Mike Keneally influenced. And then I don't know how it happened, but Brian actually, I think it might have been through MySpace or something around 2005 when Solar Flag came out. Brian actually bought a copy of the album, or I don't know, he basically emailed me and said, loved Solar Flare and thought it was great. And maybe also because, maybe it was via Marco, because Marco's playing on that. And so Brian emailed me, and I was like, oh, great, I'm glad you enjoyed it. And then Marco moved to San Diego, and I thought, right, now here's the opportunity to make those connections and start recording in California, and that opened up the next phase after Solar Flag. Then came the sort of all the San Diego session stuff, which was it's interesting. We talk about these little windows of recording, because I mean, originally I went over in 2007, 2009, and 2016. Those are the 3 trips to California, and they just yielded so much material. But then I just recorded everything, and we used Double Time Studios with Jeff Forrest Engineering, which is where those early 90s Mike Keneally albums were recorded. So I wanted the same studio, the same sound, same players, and so Mark opened that door, and just yielded just such a rich tapestry of sounds, and these sessions were just amazing. It gave me a chance to also push the musicians in the studio, and we'd do jams and experimentations and try different things out. And they're all willing to just try my goofy ideas and see what would happen if we do that, or try different versions of songs. So I came out with, I mean, if I think of the albums that came out of those sessions, there's Reality Is My Plaything, which is a double album. Then there's a companion album, which is Play My Strange Things. It's really 3 albums of that. Then there's one track that made it on the Interdimensional Garden Party, Floating, that came from those sessions. And then there's the Inner Cosmic Spiral that came from those sessions again. So, it's over 4 albums of material that came from all those recording sessions. And then that's it, because Brian just emailed me recently. Is that really everything we've done so far? The Inner Cosmic Spiral is kind of like is the last material from those sessions. And in a way, because that sort of almost like draws a line under that period, that sort of little, that those San Diego sessions draws a line underneath them. What's interesting now is just I feel like it's opening a door to something new, a different era of, and I think probably that ties into doing the PhD at Cardiff University. So that's opening up a new era, new combinations of instruments and musicians. So
you start to compose more sort of orchestral music now.
That's true, yeah. So that's opening up different avenues. So yeah, but it's going back to these little windows of recording opportunities. It's like I can sort of definitely see the 90s home recording stuff, then recording with Marco in 2003 to do Solar Flare, that opening the San Diego stuff. So following Marco into when he moved to the US and opening up to that scene, and then also doing the normalizer stuff, the recording to Marco's drum solos. So Marco's opened a lot of doors creatively into a lot of compositional opportunities for me, which I've grabbed and thought, when he said, do you want to record something for my drum solo, I was just like, oh yeah, that sounds interesting, let's do that. And that yielded 2 albums as well, the Dance with the Anima and Deep with the Anima. So yeah, a lot has come out of that sort of collaboration with Marco, which is good. And you, in a similar way, you've had with this ongoing collaboration with Charlie, haven't you? He's become the signature drummer for your sound.
Yeah, because he happens to be one of my favorite drummers. He's just got such a great energy, I just love his playing. In terms of energy and feel and the type of grooves he plays, it's just we have a sort of a great kind of musical communication when we play live. He understands what I'm going for, and he's always there. Sometimes he goes a bit crazy, but that's the fun of it, But it's a similar situation with the time I had at the studio, and that's where the garden sessions come from. It's that time. But there were multiple recordings, and like yourself, I made the most of all the musicians that were coming to the studio. A lot of the musicians that I was working with at the time, they were like top London session musicians, and they would just come in, and they knew that there was no money, but they just were just interested in playing this music.
That's great, yeah.
And I was just continuously reminding myself of how lucky I was to have these great players come in and do it for nothing, and to be really interested, and traveling from different parts of London to come to Stoke Newington, to record at Charlie's studio. And it was just great. And I had great vocalists like Marnie, Debbie French, and Andy Panay, who played with Cleo Lane. I mean, the collective credits of these musicians include Nile Rodgers, Chaka Khan, Paul McCartney, Bjork. The list goes on.
The top London session.
Top London, and we would talk about their gigs, and it was just really fascinating to learn about the whole experience of playing with these people. But I think in some ways it was refreshing for them to play this music, because it was something that they hadn't played before. It was something a little bit different, something they weren't quite used to playing, and they were interested in the challenge. So like you did with the San Diego sessions, I did with the garden sessions, of just trying to maximize my resources, just just record everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And then worry about it later on. And even now, even on this album, I've an album about to come out called Chim's Tea Party at the White House. There's one track on there that was recorded in 96, 97, with Charlie playing drums, that I've cleaned up and everything. And I think pretty much every album that I've done, the last couple of albums I've done, there's been stuff on there.
Yeah. Since
the garden sessions, really. Even before that, the whole discography is scattered with these recordings from that time, and there's still more.
There's still more. You still haven't exhausted that supply.
No, there's still lots of other things that I've got to organise and get ready for release. So, but it's what you do, isn't it? If you have access to this, and you know that this is an opportunity that may not come around again, or at least not for a very long time, you're going to...
You maximise it, absolutely. Yeah.
So when did you get interested in the singing side of things? Because a lot of your early recordings were mostly guitar, instrumental.
Yes.
What inspired you to start sort of doing vocal music?
I was using my voice for textures for sounds. I mean, if you listen to Anomalies, there's this the opening track, Ufology. So this is a track I did originally in '95, one of my first recordings on the 8-track. But there's little chanting sounds I'm doing with the voice. Just I thought, because it's ufology, I want to sort of create an alien atmosphere. It's all done with whole tone scales and this sort of in 5/4, and it was just this sort of interesting riff, and then it sort of breaks down, and I could just hear this little chanting, like little munchkins chanting. And I thought, okay, let's do that sound, and I started using my voice. So I started using this on Wolves Beyond Cause. There's little elements of my voice in there as well. And it became a texture. And also the other thing I was using with the sampler, I'd use little fragments of voice in the sampler, just voices that I sort of would maybe hear on the TV or something that just had a little sing-songy sound. And I thought, I'll just record that and just take little snippets of the sound. So there's a track called Gibber, which is my idea of gibberish, really, because it's just the little sounds of the voice in little microseconds of it, just to capture that inflection.
Yeah.
And then I recombine it in the sampler to make a sort of some kind of strange vocal track. So I was always interested in playing with the sound of the voice. But then it was like, I didn't know if I had the confidence to actually be the singer. But after Solar Flare, I think it's, again, being so inspired by Mike Keneally's output. And I'd spoken to Mike Keneally about this as well, being this sort of, the guitarist then steps forward to be the singer and the frontman. It can be quite a transition. But I felt at the time that was my next step as an artist, the artistic growth. It's every album was a challenge. If I just put out Solar Flare Part 2, it wouldn't have been satisfying. I just was like, no, I want to do songs now. As soon as I finished Solar Flare, I thought that's the next artistic challenge. It terrified me because I really didn't know my voice, but I started writing songs for it in 2006, and then when I moved to London in 2007, I rented out a little soundproof recording studio. Well, it's like a practice recording studio in Shepherd's Bush, and I'd go there, a couple of times a week, and it was a soundproof, so I could really discover my voice, so I could scream and yell and try different things out, and I'd do that every week. And it was a way of discovering how to approach these songs and what my voice could do, what it couldn't do, where it sounded good, where it didn't sound good, where it would start straining and breaking apart, or where I can get, certain tonalities and emotions out of it. A lot of that turned into pieces from In Reality Is My Plaything. I think that's the genesis of that. That was also a reason why that album took quite a while, because the initial recordings were done in 2007 and then a couple in 2009, but it did take a while because I was really trying to find my voice on that, and the right voice for the songs, the right character, the right tone, the right way of singing. And there was a lot of discovery, and just like I say, several times a week I'd go to Shepherd's Bush, record with my laptop, and I'd record these outputs and listen back and sort of go, okay, that's better, more of this, less of that. It was a valuable time, and I since discovered what what I'm trying to express vocally. So it's, I guess that there's things on the voice, this a level of expressivity, and obviously in terms of lyrics that you don't have that same expression on the guitar. There's a fascination with the human voice that's comes back really from those early recordings, and there's also something that I want to express lyrically as well. There's ways of viewing the world, my metaphysical sides and interests.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why it was important for you to be able to sing them yourself rather than get someone else to sing them, because they had a specific narrative that was reflective of you essentially, that could only be expressed by you, rather than telling someone else, oh, this is how you express it, this is how you sing it?
Well, in hindsight, I think that's a factor. I think at the time I just wanted to explore this undiscovered country that was my voice and see, okay, what can it do? And because that I just said, you're going to grow this way. I just felt like each album is a process of growing and self-development for me, and I just intuitively I thought, if you want the greatest amount of growth, explore your voice, explore your lyrics, explore what's inside that wants to be expressed, and that's the natural outgrowth of that, is that it is being expressed by me, but at the time I wasn't thinking only I can sing these songs this way. It was more the case that I was just thinking, how can I grow as a musician, as an artist, as a singer? What's the next artistic challenge? And this is my artistic challenge. And also, like I said, I had that. I was inspired by Mike Keneally, those albums from the 90s that he did, and he'd found he's got his own unique style of singing and delivery and lyrics, which are just so quintessentially him. And it was almost like, oh, that's great. He's found his, he's got his voice on guitar, he's got his voice as a composer, he's got his voice as a singer as well. That sort of, and I think like, okay, I've got my voice as a composer, my voice as a guitarist, but I haven't discovered that other side of me. Something that needs to grow. When it's almost just like you realize, okay, you've been watering these plants, but you haven't been watering this plant much. Let's water it and see what it yields. And I didn't know if when I started, I didn't know, maybe I won't like what I come up with. Maybe I'll think like, okay, I need to get a singer. I was open to that. Maybe I can't deliver what I hear on these songs. I mean, certainly since then, like with the Interdimensional Garden Party, I've used like Ellie Williams, other singers, Rob Grokert, as other singers as well, for backing vocals, but also for lead vocals. And you start realizing, I now know, having done that work, what my voice is good at, what it's not so good at, where it excels and where it kind of struggles. And so it's a case of like, well, rather than strain myself to try and get some kind of usable recording with my voice, I can use another singer who would suit way better than something I could use. So but I've done that work now. I know my voice well. It's the same way when you know your capabilities, on any instrument. Sure. You can sort of realize, okay, I can do that. And of course, when I do it, it'll have a certain inflection, but there's things I can't do so well. Yeah. And sometimes it's like just being, okay, I can't do that so well, or it's going to take me a hell of a lot of time to do that. Let's see what happens, let's get someone else in and use their talents as well, and let that also expand the music.
Of course it's going to do that. We have different singers singing the music. I mean,
you've explored your voice as well.
Well, I was singing in the first band when I was still at school.
I remember those. Yeah, you were singing your Hendrix songs.
I was singing
down the pub, down the Horse and Groom.
Down the Horse and Groom. I was doing the pub gigs. I was only 16, and I was singing then. And I've always sung. I've not been particularly fond of my own voice. I don't think I have a great singing voice at all. But over the years, I've realized that if I lower my expectations, I can create songs where I can sing and I'm happy with the way it sounds.
Yeah.
I'm not ecstatic, but I'm happy with the way it's happy enough for it to go out and for other people to listen to it.
Yeah.
But from a technical sort of perspective, one thing I realized was for many years, I would write a song and I would sing it.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about the key. I would just, if it's going to be in this key, fine. It just means I have to work harder to sing it, right? And I've done a few songs like that. And one day I was in the studio with Imani, and she's a vocalist for Incognito, and she was listening back to a track I played where I was singing. She said, you've got something, but you sound like you're straining. You sound, it's your throat is closed, and it sounds restricted. There's some kind of constriction going on there. I said, oh, okay. So she gave me a few lessons. She said, let it come from here rather from here. And so I practiced a little bit like yourself, practice singing sort of where no one could hear me practicing, right? Because you get very conscious about your voice if you're not a singer. And I just practiced, but I continued to sing keys that weren't right.
Yeah.
And it was only in the last couple of years, I think it was just before I started recording Living the Past and Future Tense. It was an acoustic album I recorded, put out in 23, where I'm singing on it with acoustic guitars and other acoustic instruments. And I realized, if I've got this range, it's very limited range, but it works in that limited range. Don't go too high, don't go too low, just stick to that range. So I started tuning the guitar down to keys. Yeah. So I'd learned the song, I had created the chords and all the picking IDs and all that. I didn't want to change that, so instead I just tuned the guitar down by a minor thirds, whatever was needed in order to sing comfortably.
There you go, easy solution. Too easy, was it?
Yeah, it took me about 30 years to figure it out.
That's too easy. I need to sweat more and be more of a struggle.
Yeah, I have a tendency to, I think that's the thing that you have. If you have an element of perfectionism in what you do, you will have a tendency to sort of pain over it, because you feel like if you haven't grafted enough, then it's not good.
Yeah, exactly. If you're not miserable by the end of the recording session because you pushed yourself to such an extreme.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, I used to go that far, but maybe you were a little bit more laid back about it.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it was just, I don't feel like I've done a good job if I just, I can never do something quickly and just get it out there. I never feel right. I just have to make sure that I'm happy with it, and sometimes people around you might say, well, it's done, it's fine. I said, no, it's fine, but I need to do, it's fine. And sometimes I'll just say, no, it's fine. And then when they're gone, I'll just start editing without them knowing,
It's fine, but I haven't drawn blood yet. So, but there is that perfectionistic side that can go to, if I'm left unchecked, can make it miserable.
Yeah, it can.
Worlds Beyond Chords, my debut album, was quite a miserable experience in terms of how I pushed myself to such an extreme. I mean, it's nice that it's such an extreme album and it has a unique sound because of it, but it wasn't miserable recording it because I was really just sort of, I'm not, it has to be better and has to be better. I'm going to do it again. I even wrote a song called Why Suffer because I was just like pushing myself to record these sort of weird random guitar lines that were just like, and then that was just the recording side, and then the production side, because I had to mix everything live in one, before computers, so I had a Yamaha mixing desk and everything that needed to be recorded live from the 8-track down to DAT. And because there were multiple things, you're maximizing the 8-track, so there were multiple things, different instruments on the one track of the 8-track, so you had to suddenly switch channel and sort of pan them differently. It was constantly, I had a chart of, you were doing the automation live.
You were playing an instrument.
You were playing the instrument, and if you messed up, you had to start all over again.
Yeah.
And I messed up loads of times, and I'd be like, oh no, especially like in the last 10 seconds of the mix, and be like, oh, and then afterwards I said, why am I putting myself through this, But it is part of that energy of pushing yourself, the challenge. But it's just a thin line to go to an extreme, because I got quite depressed afterwards, thinking, that wasn't fun to go that far. But I learned a lesson from that, because it's like, okay, I want to make this fun again. Which, in a way, that's why Worlds Beyond Chords is such a dark album. It's just, it's an intense album, and it has its own sound and quality, but it wasn't fun and I look at Anomalies, which was recorded at the same time because I was doing 2 albums together at the same time, and like Anomalies is much more fun because I wasn't so serious about it, and so you kind of get these 2 albums. You know, one is dark and one is light. One sort of playful, the Anomalies, and the other one, and Wolves Beyond Cause is like, this is what happens when perfectionism and self-torturing and draw. You know, if you're not drawing blood, you're not doing a good take. It's like, okay. Enough of that nonsense.
Yeah, it is nonsense. Yeah. I mean, there, as you say, there's a fine line, isn't there, between getting it right and taking it to the extremes where you're not going to be happy with it, no matter how it turns out. You know, that's when you need to sort of take a look at what's happening and think about the outcome. I mean, sometimes space is a good thing. I mean, it's just to. What I mean by space is that you take some time away.
Not launching yourself out into space.
I mean launching yourself out into space. But just having that space from the recording, taking time out and then coming back, you know, a week or 2 weeks later, and having a completely different perspective on things. And particularly if you're mixing it, if you're the one who's mixing it, and I've noticed you talking about automating mixes and what a nightmare. I mean, mixing per se for me can be a nightmare. Just trying to, you know, get things balanced and. I mean, how did you go about mixing was it just kind of just learning by doing? Kind of
learning by doing. Yeah. I mean, obviously, like I said, those 90s albums were mixed, you know, hands-on on the mixing desk, and then from Solar Flare onwards, it was, now I've got a computer that can take care of that. Oh wow, I can automate this, and it was just like such a different approach. But you also got into the trap of everything suddenly, the energy moved up into your head rather than in your body, and everything becomes this sort of head space of 2 dB here, 1 dB there, and little sort of little tiny automation curves that you do, and it's much more efficient and much more precise. But I was aware I was losing something when I was moving to the computer. It's funny. I felt something. This is changing this is going to change me in the way I make music. It's going to be less hands-on, more precise, more exactly delivering what I want as the perfectionist. I can be very perfectionistic now, but I'm losing some of the hands-on experience. So I've been conscious of that. I mean, it's has this plus, you know, good side and bad side. And I'm it has indulged my perfectionistic side to kind of get the mixes I wanted. And I have, going back to your question, I have just taught myself by listening, trying to mimic sounds, reading as much as I could, going back through all those Sound on Sound magazines and trying to glean ideas from what mics do they use, how do they position, what preamps, you know, what
does compression do, and how can you use sidechain
and a lot of trial and error as well. In a way, it can lose some of the experimentation I had when I was in the 90s, just doing hands-on mixing, because you just try things and get weird results. Sometimes you just mess up and bang your head on a wall, but you lost that sort of, let's try this, turn that and patch this through this, and
because it doesn't facilitate that kind of experimentation, because it's all this little mouse that you got.
I could plug things in at random. You know, I had a patch bay to the mixing desk, and what if I create a feedback loop into the sort of the delay and into this, and turn the send up, and all of a sudden you get this screaming sound. Well, that's cool. And there's
more hands-on, isn't it?
Yeah, and things, you know, Wolves Beyond Cause and Anomalies is full of these kind of like strange sounds and weird sounds I just get by just patching things, trying different things, and creating these feedback loops and sounds, and so it lost that sort of level of experimentation. I mean, I've consciously brought that back into it by sort of more using handheld recorders, where I can just, if I'm getting a sound I like, whether it's, you know, out in nature or whether it's something I'm recording and there's an unexpected sound. I just grab the Tascam and just record it and just go, right, okay, capture that, and that becomes part of my sound library that I can just, that's an interesting sound. So I'm collecting sounds as well, which is kind of what I was doing back then, just by haphazardly coming up with sounds. I think, that's weird. Anything that catches my ear. But in terms of the mixing, I've enjoyed sort of honing my craft, I suppose. If I look back in hindsight, there's been trying to get my sound across, because I think all of a sudden you've got that. You're not just the composer, not just the artist. Yeah. You can sculpt the drum sound, you can sculpt the bass sound, the vocals, you can rearrange things. Especially what's interesting is when I was redoing things like those 90s recordings, holotropic guitar, for example. I can change the cheesy, keyboard sounds I had and get some really fancy soft synth in, and it sounds like, or an orchestral sample, and like all of a sudden it's like, wow, now that sounds like a real state-of-the-art production. So you certainly can improve sounds with that when you know what's possible. Yeah. And sculpt the sound to how you want it. It just becomes this other level of refinement, which is important.
It is, yeah.
For me, anyway.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Yeah. It's the same for me. I mean, exactly the same thing. It was just reading Sound on Sound articles about using compression and taking away frequencies rather than boosting frequencies. Just basic kind of standard stuff that most, mix engineers will talk about for people who are trying to break into mixing or learn about mixing. And for me, it depends on, some albums I've mixed myself, they tend to be albums that are a little bit more experimental. Yeah. Because I know that unless I'm with the mix engineer in the studio, it's not going to sound how I envisioned it.
For me, you develop a really particular aesthetic, a particular sort of taste of what you like the sound of. For me, drums, I like the sound in a certain way. And the synth sounds of clicky programmed, those sort of prog metal drums, I don't like the sound of them. It's just I prefer a more natural sounding drum kit. And that just becomes a choice. But a mixing engineer who doesn't know that might think, well, that's the standard drum sound for this kind of genre, or this is what everyone expects, and just delivers a particular drum sound and unless you're there saying, no, I don't want that drum, because they don't know. No, they just go, unless you specifically have to go like, no, I want this kind of drum sound, I want this kind of bass sound, I want this kind of, my music has this vibe.
You have to explain it.
Yeah, and sometimes words are inadequate because you're trying to say, well, there's a softer, fluffier kind of bass sound. What are we talking about? Softer, fluffier bass sound.
You know how to get it yourself with time, but you don't know how to explain it. And then moreover, you don't know how to explain it to somebody else, And I've noticed the times that I have given a mix engineer the more experimental music, it's good. It's kind of balanced. But what ends up happening when there's a lot of stuff on there, when a lot of different instruments happening, they tend to mix it. It's very balanced. Yes. But then when I mix, for me, when I'm doing experimental music, which has a lot of different elements in there, I need to hear everything very clearly. Even if it's something in the background, I still need to be able to hear it. But what they'll tend to do, they'll tend to bring it low in the mix because they're thinking of the mix as a whole. Yeah. I'm thinking of it too, but I'm also thinking that there are certain things that have got to pop out of the mix at certain times. And when they don't pop out, and it could just be a case of 1 or 2 dB, it makes a big difference. Yeah, because as a composer, you know what you're prioritizing, don't you? This is a background texture, or this flares in the background, but this is actually a key part of this sound or this percussive hit I want, or whatever it could be. It could be a little triangle that you want to come out at that particular point. Yes. And if that triangle's not at the front, it ruins the whole mix. Exactly. And unless you're with the mix engineer and you've got a lot of time, you're not going to get the results. So I tend, like yourself, to do the more experimental stuff. I'll mix it myself. Yeah. And of course, it's going to take me much longer than a professional mix engineer. Yeah. That's the only kind of challenge. It's just an extra It's an extra thing because you spend a lot of time recording, writing the music, using the right instruments. So am I going to use a keyboard here? Am I going to use this synth sound? Am I going to use that bass sound? And then you're recording remotely with whoever's contributing to the album musically, it's going to play a solo on it. And you've got all these things that you're thinking of and trying to juggle, And then when that's all done, as if that weren't enough, you now got to sit there for the next couple of weeks and go,
or
months even. Right, how am I going to put this together now?
Yeah,
and it's the thing I look forward to the least.
Well, it's also arrangement as well, because you end up also taking things out of the mix, isn't it?
Yeah.
So a lot of the times I've had mixes that's too dense. I have to take away that guitar, and sometimes you even actually I need to double that and add to this bit. And
so the jazz thing it started off with just sort of dabbling with it really in the form of that, learning that solo jazz guitar piece.
And it's funny you approaching it like a classical guitar piece
in a way.
So it's before the improvisational side of things,
yes.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
So it was really it must have been just the sound of the chords and the rhythms that sort of.
Absolutely, yeah. Like I said, I didn't really know what the names of the chords were. I didn't know what the changes were. I was just going by what I was hearing, and then of course I got into the conservatorium, and when I got in there, well, just to back up a little bit, I wanted to go and study jazz after finishing the rock and pop course, and I was looking around the UK, and the only one that was available at that time, so we're looking at 1990. The only one that was available was like a summer course at Leeds,
right?
And it was just for the summer. It was a short jazz course, but I was looking for something a bit more substantial. And some people had mentioned that I should go, if I'm really interested, I should go to LA and go to
Musicians Institute,
the Berkeley.
The Berkeley one,
Berkeley College. I didn't want to go to America. It just felt too far away, and I just didn't want to go there. So I ended up going to Australia instead, which was also very far away, probably farther away.
But you had your family over there.
They were over there too, yeah. But then they moved back as soon as I arrived.
When you arrived,
it's like they almost, he's coming back over. We better go back. It's almost we were chasing each other around the world, kind of thing. And so in 1990, I auditioned for the Western Australia Conservatorium of Music, and I got in. And I remember the first, because I was living on campus, I had student housing, and I was living there, and I was just like a 5-minute walk, and I was on campus. I was in the library, I was in the rehearsal studios, the practice rooms, the pianos, and everything was right on my doorstep. And I remember the week before I was officially starting lessons, I just went in to have a look around and get a feel for it. I went to the library, and it was the most exciting thing for me, because they had a huge jazz record collection. They had classical music as well, but I just went straight to the jazz. It was all vinyl. There were no CDs. It was all vinyl. And just looking through and finding Return to Forever records, because the one I had I bought from Rock Scene, that was the only one I had where I've known you before. And I was looking through Return to Forever, and I thought, they had another one. I didn't know they did this album, and I didn't know they did an album before that one, and then one after that, and then one after that, and on and on and on. And then I found, Wes Montgomery albums. I started getting into that, and they had like listening booths. You put on the records, you put your headphones on, and I was just, I've come to the right place. I can see I'm really going to enjoy myself for the next 2 years, just with no distractions. This is my life for the next 2 years. And then there was a guy who I'd met, my dad had taken to a jazz club a few months before. This was just right about the time where I auditioned. And there was a jazz club called Hyde Park Hotel. And they used to have jazz in there. And some of the lecturers from the course were playing there. And there was a guy called Gary Lee, who was a vibraphonist, who was playing a gig there. And I introduced myself and told him I'm going to audition, try and get on. And he was cordial, he was nice. And we just sat there, watched the gig, and I just watched him solo and watched the band, and thought, wow, this is great. So you're right in that environment, immediately in that environment. It's kind of a cultural thing happening, And then that's it. That was it. I just was just 100% committed to just learning this music. And then you went to Vienna.
I went to Vienna in 91, September 91. And that's where I sort of was introduced more to jazz, because I think I was still more of a metal shred guy until holding on to that as long as I could. But I suppose I was getting more into the classical side because I did my music A level, and part of and also the guitarist I was into had that classical influence. I remember reading Marty Friedman talking about Stravinsky and Philip Glass, and I'd be like, oh, who are these guys? I've got to check them out. So that was my initial expansion from just the metal world. It was just, and plus I was in the music A level, so I was just checking out. Okay, so who let's get into. I remember liking Mussorgsky, a lot of the Russian composers, and sort of exploring that, and then some other sort of romantic composers, Debussy as well, and Ravel. I thought, wow, and I was sort of started opening up my ears to this other world. But the jazz sort of came a little later. I think it probably was in the sort of early 90s, where again through the guitar shred thing, it'd be like discovering Al Di Meola basically, and it'd be like, oh wow, I love this stuff, because I love the Spanish influence, and my mum loved flamenco music, so that was something I was familiar with. So with that sort of tinge in the, obviously with Al Di Meola, you had Paco de Lucia joining him, and then the guitar trio stuff with McLaughlin. So that sort of started opening up my ears towards directing towards the jazz world a little bit more. And obviously Holsworth did that, and Frank Gambale, and Scott Henderson was another amazing player. And so there's the fusion guys that started opening up my ears to that. And then going to Vienna, and then Mahavishnu Orchestra at the same time. That was a big, because that was just like, my God, I love this music so much. And I realized there's more the fusion stuff, and so the jazz sort of came a bit slowly, and then I think it was just the saxophone, but starting to get into the saxophone, so the discovering Giant Steps and the Coltrane stuff, and then the Charlie Parker stuff, and then started to go, oh wow, this has the intensity I loved of shredding, but now on different instruments. So that started opening up more. But initially I was, because there's so much to take in. But it is, and again, like you said, there was a library in the school, and Robert, who looked after the library, would you give him a cassette and he'd tape any of the records for you on the library, so you could just sort of listen to it. I know you're not supposed to do that.
Funny, sorry, just to interject. The same thing happened to me. It wasn't a guy. He wasn't part of the library, but he was a fellow student. Yeah. Brett Dell, his name was, and he was into all that Dixieland stuff, and he was a really interesting guy, very smart, and he had rewired the record player, because there was a record player, but there was a cassette machine that was built into the wooden booth, the frame of the wooden booth, and he used to go around the back and he would connect the record player to the cassette so that we could. So I made loads of tapes, but he only did it on one, and he sort of said, "It's number 4 over there." So I used to take cassettes in, no one's looking for them, and just record for them.
Oh, we're poor students, how else can we listen to this? There's no internet.
I wasn't selling them, it was just personal use.
Yeah, it was just educating yourself. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't the same way when I was listening to the classical music. I'd borrow it from the library, tape it, and take it, because it's just like, otherwise I wouldn't have access to that music. But they made lasting impressions. But like you said, it was going to the library, discovering all these sort of players and all this music, and it was a lot. It was, I think, like you, it was a sort of where you're overwhelmed by a lot of new music, and I found also my musical taste expanding away from just the metal stuff, and also I was sort of also starting to hear some stuff from the avant-garde. John Zorn, I remember being introduced to. And I remember, some people were giving me some Mr. Bungle demos, early demos before they were signed as well. So there was this current coming through. And I was listening to that in the metal stuff. I'd be listening to bands that were sort of fusing, like Fishbone, that were mixing in sort of ska and funk and other influences. So I was always trying to find a different sound. I think one of the key things that happened, one of the key influences was I remember I came home, my first Christmas back home, I think would have been, Christmas of '91, back home after my sort of initial term in Vienna. And I remember thinking, it was one night, it was late, and I was thinking, I want to listen to some chilled out classical music. It's late, just before I go to bed. So what you do, you turn on Radio 3, BBC Radio 3 with the classical music. So I set the station, Radio 3, put it on, and this industrial sort of metal came through, and I'm going, what's going on? Okay, hold on, this isn't Radio 3. I better check the dial. Yeah, it is Radio 3. Says Radio 3. Yeah. What's this? What? Have they swapped station frequencies around while I've been away? Something like that. And the next thing came through, and maybe some African music came through, and I thought, this is weird. And then some weird cello and throat singing came through, and then it was like all this music coming through that I didn't know what genre was coming next. And I was like, what is this program? And then in between, these announcers would talk about the music. There's two announcers, and they talk about the music and dissect it, and having a little intelligent bit of banter about the music, and it just got the point that then free jazz came on, then maybe some electronica came on, some cutting edge 90s electronica came on. And I thought, this is an amazing program. It's like I don't know what's coming next. It's like could be any genre, any style, and it almost was a program with no boundaries, and it was called Mixing It, and it was this radio show that ran, I think, from 1990 to 2006, 2007 or something like that. And I was so taken about it, I started recording them on recording the radio shows, because it was just, that became my big education, because they would play every genre. So this is where I discovered a lot of contemporary classical composers, where I started listening to free jazz, free improvisation, Japanese noise music, avant-garde, all the avant-garde stuff, West African music, Brazilian music, all the world music was covered as well. So it was just literally, and also things, because grunge was happening at the time, but they'd find more unusual indie grunge bands that had something a little bit more interesting going on, or some quirky post-rock bands like, Shudder to Think, and there was just lots of, it was just this resource. I just saw this hour-long or so program. I think it was 45 minutes originally, but which was nice because it fit on one side of a C90.
C90s. Is it a D, AD, or a metal?
Yeah. So that was a huge thing, because I started. Initially, I couldn't listen to it all the time because I was in Vienna part of the time. But when I got back from Vienna, I just would record this program all the time and just make compilation cassettes out of my favorite bits. And that's where I heard Square Pusher the first time, Aphex Twin, so all the electronica stuff I got into, because I always get confused. There's a Square Pusher song where he goes, "Come da fucking daddy," which is a "Come on my selector" or something, which is his almost like response to "Come to Daddy."
Yeah, I think I got the Aphex Twin. I think it's an EP, and I'm pretty sure it's called "Come to Daddy," and it's got some really interesting things on it. It was one of the first releases.
The most interesting one they played, I remember in '95, was the which is under AFX, it wasn't under Aphex Twin, was Children Talking. Mm-hmm. It's that one that goes mashed potato.
Right.
Why don't you like mashed potato? And it's the most bonkers drum and bass thing you've ever heard.
Because it sounds like there's a track on the Come to Daddy recording called "Funny Little Man."
Yeah.
And it's got these really like kids' voices.
Yes.
And it just says, "Come on, you little funny man! Come on, you little funny." It goes on and on and on. And he's got this really cheeky little melody in between the speeches there. And I was mesmerized by that. And that was some of the things that were championed at that time. Interesting. Music that's using technology.
Yeah, exactly.
It was created by technology.
Yeah.
It was almost like going back to Music Concrete and the Schaefer recordings and the early kind of Berio recordings. They were experimenting with technology, but they were doing it with the technology that was available in the 90s. But really pushing the boundaries. And it was very, very interesting, that music.
Yeah. So this was my radio show that opened me up. I mean, also with the Stockhausen pieces that they play is anarchist, so I got into that contemporary classical electronica scene, John Adams, so and then all the free jazz. And it also, I think what was impressive was it gave exposure to music I didn't like, And that was just as important as music I did like, because it was like, it got me gasping, why don't I like this? And which is an important step in developing your own aesthetic taste. It's really important to know what you don't like and why you don't like it. Because why doesn't this gel with you? Because it's a way of honing what you do like.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you listen to what you don't like, it might not. What is it? Is it sometimes it's like, sometimes some free jazz and it was a lack of pulse. Sometimes the timbre, maybe the timbre just was something unpleasing to my ear. Maybe it was I couldn't grab onto it, or maybe it was too chaotic, or maybe it wasn't chaotic enough. Maybe it was too predictable. You know, it's whatever it is. But these are important. It got me really thinking deeply about music, because I'd always challenge myself when something came on. I was like, I'm not sure if I like this. But I'd be okay. Why don't you like it? You know. Yeah. And sometimes there are pieces I don't like that I love now. You know, it's things you grow into. Sometimes things require more listening. But that mixing it was such a crucial part in my development and exposure to something that was there free on radio for everyone to listen to. That kind of musical education of any genre coming next, no barriers. How about you? Because obviously, you know, there's not just the jazz, because you're interested in all music, you know.
Yeah.
You know, so what was your exposure to avant-garde, experimental, or, you know, the cutting edge sounds?
I guess well, you know, I had listened to classical music when I was doing my classical grades, so I'd heard sort of Bach and stuff like that, and I really liked that. But the more modern sounding classical music, it's a similar situation. I heard it on the radio, and it was probably Radio 3, and I think my mum had the radio on in the house, and something just caught my ear. It was a classical piece of music, and it just caught my ear because the harmony sounded, you know, just really sophisticated and very, very interesting. I was really intrigued by it. And I was like, oh, God, I've got to listen to this. So I had to get right close to the radio. My mum was cleaning and all that. I said, Mum, could you just keep it down for a sec? Because you know, I wasn't used to the movements and the duration, and any moment the radio broadcaster would come on and say that was, because there's so many dynamics in classical music, and if you don't know the piece, you don't know when it ends. So so I'm like listening to every second of this piece, just so I can ensure that I catch the name of the composer, and it was Debussy.
Right.
It was La Mer, and I was like, right, Debussy. I'm going to go and check that out. Yeah. And then I read the line. I got a CD. I read the liner notes, and it was talking about Stravinsky, and that's when I saw these other names being mentioned, and I had music that I hadn't heard of, and that's just how it started. Was from that radio broadcast, hearing Debussy, and of course I had heard Bach, but this was so removed from that because the harmony was much more modern sounding, you know, and that's how I got exposed to that kind of classical music, Stravinsky, and then it went on to Webern and Schoenberg and people like that, and of course this was after the jazz, because I started really getting serious about classical composition after I did the jazz course, and I think that was partly infused by my interest in Frank Zappa's music, because in the second year of my studies at Jazz Conservatorium is when I got into Zappa, really heavily got into Zappa's music and the orchestral stuff, and I wanted to compose like that. I was just fascinated. What really fascinated me more than anything else was the dissonant music, and I was intrigued by how that was assembled. How do you go about mapping that out if you're not borrowing from functional harmony, you're not borrowing from diatonic techniques? What is going on there? How do you sustain a composition for a period of time when you're using dissonant harmony? And of course, again, I was quite naive in terms of my understanding of it. I had this notion that in order to compose this music, you had to have perfect pitch. And you had to hear everything in your ear. And it was not really my fault, because a lot of the literature that I was reading, probably the wrong literature, was this kind of romantic idea about what it took to be a classical composer and what that signified, you know. And it was only years later that I read the Edward Hanslick, the Beauty of Music, something like that. And it talks about the sort of over-romanticization of music, taking it into the realms of, you know, it's a celestial experience. And Hanspal breaks it down. He was a deconstructionalist. You know, he broke it down and said, you know, this is sound, this is air waves, this is, and not everyone is experiencing it the same way. You know. Anyway, so I had all this information that, you know, that's what it takes, and I assumed that Zappa had that. And even when I read, like, it was an interview with Kent Nagano, and he was talking about, I'd love to work with a composer who knows the difference between a B natural and a C. A B flat or whatever it was, when he was conducting the London Symphony Orchestra pieces. I thought, well, because then obviously Zappa had perfect pitch and he could hear everything and just write it out, you know. Yeah, a naive kind of thing. Yeah. But that's the information I had, and that's what I thought. So that's when I started studying orchestral scores. And when I moved to London after being in Australia, the first year I was there, I joined various funk bands and that, and I was going out doing these gigs and late night clubs, really interesting places, really interesting people. And then I would go home like 3-4 o'clock in the morning after the jam or the gig or whatever it was, and I would get out my classical scores and just follow the notes and listen to the recordings, because I thought that's what you needed to do, is just follow scores.
Yes.
Just follow the notes and just retain the information, and then so I would just like the Rite of Spring score, I would just focus on the bassoons in the introduction. Then I would focus on the flutes, and there were multiple flutes. So then the next time I'd listen to it, all right, I'm going to focus on the second one, and I would just switch off to everything else and just focus on the second flute part, and just going through it, and then trying to decipher 2 parts and then 3 parts, just isolating instruments in my mind as I was following it. Then when I wasn't listening to it, going over and over it in my head. This is how I believed you would be able to do it. Yes. I really believed that if I kept doing this, I would be able to sit down with a piece of manuscript paper and just write orchestral music without the aid of an instrument.
Yes. Yeah.
And
now you can do that perfectly.
No, I was never able to do it.
I was kidding.
No, and I can do bits. I can do sketches.
Yeah, well, it proves it. But
I can do sketches.
Like you say, it's a romantic ideal.
It was a romantic ideal, and but it's funny. The naivety pushes you harder because you work harder, because you have this notion that that's how it's done.
Yeah.
So invariably, you spend more time, if you're that kind of person, disciplined, and you want to get good at this. You would spend more time studying it, and so you'd end up doing more work than you would if somebody came up to you before you even started and said, "Oh, you don't need to do it that way." You know what I mean? So in a way, it's good because you work harder, because you think that's what it takes to become the composer who can hear everything in their head. But there were a few pieces that I listened to that I listened to Charles Ives' Central Park in the Dark, and that was, they say no matter how eminent a composer is, there's always a predecessor. There's always something that's gone before, and you can kind of explore predecessors. You can say, oh, okay, you say Stravinsky's early pieces, early ballets. You can say, well, there's Rimsky-Korsakov influence there for sure. It's quite revealing, so you can look at any jazz musician and say, well, Charlie Parker, obviously he's got the Louis Armstrong influence in there. So there's always something that you can connect it to.
Yes. But
there are some pieces of music that just don't seem to have a predecessor. They don't seem to have an earlier example. And the Charles Ives Central Park in the Dark struck me as being something that was truly innovative.
Yeah.
Because if you listen to the very beginning, the opening bars of that piece, you have the strings moving in these this parallel harmony, fourths moving around down a semitone and up a tone, and then these kind of parallel motion. And it was very modern sounding. And so I just listened to the piece and I assumed it was written in the 50s or the 60s. And that was my, because I like to know the chronology of what I'm listening to as well, because it's informative and it helps me have a better understanding of music, time and place, And I had found out that it was written in 1906 or something like that. And I was like, crazy. Wow, that was written before the Rite of Spring. And like I was saying, it sounded like McCoy Tyner, the kind of stacked fourths moving around, like the kind of improvisations he would do in the left. He would support himself in the left hand with these stacked fourths. Another piece was from the 5 Pieces for Orchestra by Schoenberg, and it was Summer at a Lake. I think the piece is called the Fanfare Melody piece that's on that in the Opus 16, and that was written in 1909, and that was another thing that I had never. I'd listened to classical music before 1909, but I couldn't find anything that sounded like that. And then, of course, there's The Rite of Spring. Yeah. So there are three examples. I'm sure there's more, and I'm sure somebody will say, "Oh, yeah, but have you heard this?" And you can't hear everything. But what I've heard, I couldn't find any sort of thing similar to that. So for me, in terms of modern classical music, those three pieces really signify true innovation in creating something that had never been done before, at least to my knowledge.
Yes.
And so, that's when I started to get really interested in classical music. After doing the jazz, I thought I got the jazz thing down now. I'm pretty comfortable. I get it. Yeah. I know how it works. Now let's see if I can learn how to compose classical music.
Yes. And then the two start coming together.
Yeah, and then bring them together, bring in the funk music, because I also love funk music.
So tell us about your journey into that.
That's from my dad.
Right.
My mum and dad. I grew up in the 1970s. We from contemporaneous, and my dad was listening to Stevie Wonder, listening to Parliament Funkadelic, James Brown, Johnny Guitar Watson. I was brought up on that music. Cool. So it was in the blood. I just felt it, and it's not like my dad sat me down and said, "Oh, check this out." He just play it. And I just was like, "Well, what's this?" I can remember him. When you're young, typical kid, you listen to music. I used to think the music was coming from the speakers, that there were little musicians inside the speaker. I was convinced there were little musicians inside the speaker.
We have these funny little...
I just remember that vivid memory.
How long did that stay with? Till last week?
Yeah, last week. I realised that it wasn't little miniature musicians in the speakers.
Oh, it's shattered a dream for you. Oh,
I got it now. Yeah, I think
we have these delusions. Just totally aside, one of my delusions was, the tins of cat food.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I thought you had to find the picture of your cat on the tin, so that'd be your cat's cat food. So as we go through all the tins, take them out of the kid.
My cat.
Say, where's the picture of our cat? Because somebody would have a picture of your cat, and then that'll be your tin of cat food.
Well, I certainly wouldn't have found a tin of cat food for ours. We had the blue Persian cat, and that wasn't a very popular cat back then. But it's these kind of
these little innocent things. Sort of views of the world, isn't it?
Yeah. And I guess you only discovered that recently.
Yeah, I just realised it's not individual; it's a generic cat. Oh dear.
But so. Yeah, it was just there in the house, or it was in the car, and my dad had real eclectic taste. He was he had very interesting musical taste, because he would listen to Fleetwood Mac, Supertramp, even ABBA. He was into music. He would listen to
my mum
anything.
was a big ABBA fan,
really?
so that came through. I mean, there wasn't much popular music in our household. Like I said, my dad was into Indian classical music and Qawwali music. And my mum flamenco, but she loved ABBA, so there was ABBA's greatest hits going on in the background or whatever it was. So that was always constant as well. So,
and then, of course, then it was like for me in the late 70s, early 80s, it was electro. The Gary Newman.
Yeah, you got into that sort of
and it's still there. Pop there. It's still there. The Gary Newman influence is always there with a lot of the stuff that I do. The sounds and sometimes the melodies and just the concept of it, and then I just sort of getting into the electro stuff and the 80s music. I still love it. It's really interesting what you were saying earlier on.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say, it was really interesting what you were saying earlier on about switching off from the complex music that you write. Yeah. It's funny because I think about the music I listen to. I don't really listen to complex music outside of my own. Occasionally I might, but most of the time I listen to songs.
Yeah.
I listen to jazz, Wes Montgomery, stuff that I can relax to, and just enjoy just enjoy the beauty of the music, and XTC or Gary Newman or just anything from the 80s that's on my compilation CD or whatever it is. I like to listen to that. Really simple, but interesting timbres and nice melodies. And I guess in some respect it's because of the nostalgia of it as well. I like the feeling.
It's something you bond to, emotionally bond to as you grow up, isn't it?
Yeah.
Same way you bond to, TV shows or whatever. It's that sort of, when you're young, you kind of like, you're very open, and when something comes in and has an emotional resonance with you, you sort of bond with it, and you hold that bond forever, really.
That's right, you do.